4 miles out, one stray glint, and suddenly the ocean is a firing squad. It wasn't just a naval patrol. It was a billion-pound suicide. How did the King's most elite stealth machine, a shadow of steel and sonar, manage to alert every enemy torpedo in the Atlantic with a single ray of light? The Admiralty called it an act of God. The truth was far stupider. The most expensive eyes in the world were being betrayed by 4% of the sun. But history got it wrong. While the generals demanded thicker armor, the only warning came from a woman 3,000 miles away, ignored because she spent her days playing with soap bubbles. They dismissed her as a lady researcher in a man's war. But she was the only one who knew how to murder the light. Why did the system ignore the only tactic that could save them? The answer wasn't in the classified vaults, but in the hands of the underdog. The Mid-Atlantic, October 14th, 1939. The water is a bruised purple, churning with the weight of a coming winter. This is the dawn of the Second World War, a period the newspapers call the phony war. But there is nothing phony about the pressure of the Atlantic pressing against a hull of cold British steel. Below the surface, the air is thick. It carries the heavy, cloying scent of diesel fuel, the tang of unwashed wool, and the metallic sharpness of oxygen being recycled for the 100th time. The crew of the submarine moves with a rhythmic, practiced grace. They are ghosts in a pressurized tube, stalking the gray expanse of the ocean. In this world, sound is a confession, and light is a death sentence. The commander stands at the center of the control room. He is a man who trusts his training, a man who believes that the 5 inches of steel surrounding him is an absolute barrier between his men and the void. He grips the handles of the periscope. With a hiss of hydraulics, the polished tube rises, piercing the surface for only a fleeting moment. He needs a glimpse, a single surgical look to confirm the horizon is empty. But the sun is low, and the sun is indifferent to human ambition. As the periscope clears the whitecaps, a stray beam of October light strikes the curved glass of the lens. In that heartbeat, the laws of physics execute a silent judgment. The physics of this disaster are as old as the stars. When light moves from the thin air into the dense medium of a glass lens, it hits a molecular wall. Most of the light passes through to the commander's eye, but a tiny rebellious fraction, exactly 4%, shatters. It bounces back off the surface like a stone skipping across a frozen pond. In the open sea, that 4% isn't just a glint, it is a signal flare. 4 miles to the east, a German U-boat commander narrows his eyes against the glare of the morning. He doesn't see the silhouette of a British hull. He doesn't see the wake of a ship. He sees a flash, a diamond-bright spark on the rolling obsidian waves that has no business being there. Nature does not produce straight lines of light that sharp. He doesn't need a visual on the submarine. The light has already told him the story. The U-boat commander smiles, a cold, clinical expression, and orders the tubes readied. While the British crew believes they are shrouded by the safety of the deep, they have already been betrayed by the very glass they rely on to survive. They are victims of a fatal flaw in optics that the Admiralty has accepted as an unchangeable fact of nature. To the high-ranking officers in London, a lens is a lens. Reflection is a tax you pay to the universe for the privilege of sight. Nature cannot be bargained with. the admirals tell themselves, over glasses of sherry in the safety of Whitehall. They believe their submarines are the pinnacle of engineering, ignoring the reality that every periscope they deploy is a lighthouse for the enemy. They treat the loss of ships as a statistical inevitability, a budget line item in the cost of empire. But while the Royal Navy prepares for more funerals, a different kind of war is being fought in a place where the sound of the ocean is a distant memory. Schenectady, New York. Inside the sprawling complex of General Electric, the air smells of ozone and floor wax. This is a cathedral of American industry, a place where men in white shirts solve the problems of the modern world. But tucked away in a quiet laboratory, far from the boardrooms and the cigar smoke, Katharine Burr Blodgett is standing over a tray of water. She is a pioneer, the first woman to ever earn a PhD in physics from Cambridge. But in 1939, to the men walking the hallways, she is an anomaly, an assistant, a quiet woman who spends her days playing with soap bubbles and liquid films. Her male peers are focused on the big science, the massive turbines, the heavy machinery, the weapons of war. They view Katharine's work with thin films as a domestic curiosity, a delicate hobby that has no place in a world of crumbling borders and sinking ships. They are wrong. Inside the General Electric labs, the atmosphere isn't one of discovery. It is one of suppression. Katharine isn't just working, she is stealing. Every hour she spends on her invisible glass is an hour stolen from the Priority 1 development of radar tubes. To her superiors, her work with liquid films is a domestic distraction, a waste of wartime resources that borders on criminal negligence. They order her to stop. They tell her the film is too fragile, too feminine, too useless. But Katharine continues in the dead of night, using misappropriated chemicals and unlogged lab time. She is operating as a ghost within her own company. If she fails, it isn't just a career ending. It's a trial for sabotage. She isn't just fighting physics. She is committing a quiet treason against a system that demands she stay in her place. She works in the shadows of the laboratory, her hands steady as she dips a sheet of glass into a liquid film. She isn't interested in the roar of the engines. She is focused on a paradox. She knows that if she can coat the glass with a layer of molecules exactly 1/4 the wavelength of light, she can force the reflection to eat itself. It is a quest for invisibility in an age of total surveillance. The British commander in the Atlantic, however, still believes he is a master of the dark. He treats the horizon as his playground, confident that the deep water is his shield. He has spent years learning the protocols of silence, ordering his men to wrap their boots in cloth and speak in whispers. He has mastered the art of hiding 1,000 tons of steel, but he has fatally underestimated the boss of this environment, the physics of the lens. He treats the silence of his ship as his ultimate defense. But it isn't surrender he should be looking for. It's the light he's shedding. He believes the sun is his friend, illuminating his targets. He is oblivious to the reality that the sun has already pointed a finger directly at his heart. The Feignsch hammer, the German torpedo, is already leaving the tube. It cuts through the water with a predatory hum, guided by the memory of a glint that lasted less than a second. Back in Schenectady, Katharine Burr Blodgett lowers a slide into a solution. She is not looking at a submarine. She is looking at a soap bubble. And in the shimmering, iridescent surface of that bubble, She sees the secret that will either save the world's sailors or be buried with them. While the British Admiralty accepted the glint of a periscope as an unavoidable tax of war, Katharine Burr Blodgett was busy rewriting the laws of what was possible. The year is 1938. The world is sliding toward a cliff, but inside General Electric's research laboratory, the atmosphere is one of sterile, quiet intensity. Katharine moves through this masculine fortress with a focused, almost rhythmic precision. She is not a woman who seeks the spotlight. She is a woman who seeks the truth hidden in the microscopic. Her peers, the men who occupy the grand offices, view her work with a patronizing tolerance. To them, she is the assistant, the one who works on the delicate things. They are busy dreaming of massive power grids and radio towers. They see her experiments with liquid films as little more than advanced housekeeping, dipping glass into trays of soap as if she were washing the dishes. But Katharine is conducting a symphony of molecular geometry. She is working with what we now call Langmuir-Blodgett films. The process is a testament to her legendary patience. She uses a specialized trough filled with water, upon which she spreads a layer of fatty acid molecules, essentially a sophisticated soap. These molecules have a head that loves water and a tail that hates it. Because of this, they stand upright, perfectly aligned like soldiers on a parade ground, exactly one molecule thick. The establishment scientists saw this as a laboratory curiosity. "A fine trick, Katharine," they might have said over their morning coffee. "But what is the use of a film so thin it cannot be felt?" They were blinded by the scale of the big system. They believed that to solve a big problem, like a sinking submarine, you needed a big solution. Bigger guns, thicker hulls. They couldn't conceive that the salvation of the Allied fleet lay in the thickness of a single atom. Katharine ignored the dismissals. She had discovered that if she dipped a sheet of glass into this molecular soup, she could deposit these layers one by one. She was building a wall, brick by microscopic brick. This is where the black box of her genius began to work. The problem with glass is that it reflects light because of a sudden change in density. Light traveling through air hits the glass and panics, bouncing back. Katharine's solution was a masterpiece of black box engineering. By layering exactly 44 layers of soap molecules onto the glass, she created a coating that was precisely 1/4 the wavelength of light thick. The input, light hits the coated glass. The mechanic. Because the coating is 1/4 wavelength thick, the light reflecting off the bottom of the film travels half a wavelength further than the light reflecting off the top. When these two waves meet, they are perfectly out of sync. They don't just clash, they cancel each other out. The output, the reflection is murdered. The light is forced to pass through the glass rather than bouncing off it. She had created invisible glass. But as she perfected this technique, the system began to flex its muscles. The military-industrial complex was waking up to the reality of the coming conflict. Suddenly, the quiet researcher who played with soap was no longer a curiosity. She was a strategic asset. However, the respect she received was a cold, transactional kind. The generals didn't care about her PhD or her years of lonely research. They saw a tool. They saw a way to give their snipers, their pilots, and their submarine commanders a blind spot in the enemy's vision. The interaction was a classic study in the arrogance of rank. Imagine a colonel, his chest heavy with medals, standing in Katharine's small lab. He looks at the invisible glass and then at the woman who made it. He doesn't see a peer, he sees a technician. "Is it durable?" he asks, his voice booming in the quiet room. "Can it stand up to the salt air, to the heat of a cockpit?" Katharine, calm and precise, explains the chemistry of the bond. She talks about the refractive index and the stability of the molecular layers. The colonel waves his hand, dismissing the science talk. "I don't need a lecture on soap, doctor. I need to know if this will keep my boys alive." He mocks the simplicity of the solution because it doesn't look like a weapon. To him, if it doesn't smoke, roar, or weigh a ton, it isn't real. He treats her discovery as if it were a happy accident of domestic intuition rather than a triumph of rigorous physics. While the establishment mocked the soap film scientist, the reality of the war was beginning to bite. In the skies over Europe, Allied reconnaissance pilots were being hunted like clay pigeons. Their massive aerial cameras, the eyes of the invasion, were betrayed by the same fatal flaw as the periscopes. A single glint of sun off a camera lens at 20,000 feet was enough for a Messerschmitt pilot to spot his prey. The British and American Air Forces were flying blind, their system of intelligence collapsing because they couldn't see without being seen. They had built the fastest planes and the best cameras, but they had ignored the ghost in the machine, the reflection. But Katharine was already in the dark, holding the silence that would save them. Working in her Schenectady lab, she began applying her invisible coating to the lenses of these massive spy cameras. She was working in near total anonymity now. Her work was classified. This meant she couldn't publish. She couldn't talk to her peers. She was effectively erased from the scientific community she had worked so hard to join. She was the ghost working behind the scenes of the great conflict. As the war escalated, the hubris of the Axis powers began to show. They believed their coastal defenses were impenetrable. They believed their U-boats were the undisputed masters of the Atlantic. They treated the ocean as their private hunting ground, confident that no Allied eye could penetrate their fog without giving itself away. But they had fatally underestimated the woman with the soap bubbles. They treated the Allied eyes as a known quantity. They looked for the flashes, the glints, the telltale signs of a lens in the sun. But the glints were disappearing. The Allied periscopes were rising and falling like shadows. The spy cameras were capturing the most intimate details of the Atlantic Wall, and the German radar operators were looking at screens that showed nothing. It wasn't that the Allies were getting better at hiding. It was that Katharine had removed the possibility of being seen. The German High Command scoffed at the reports of phantom ships and Daesh invisible scouts. They believed their equipment was superior, their optics the best in the world. They treated the silence of the horizon as a sign of their own dominance. But it wasn't dominance. It was the calm before a storm of precision-guided intelligence, all channeled through lenses that didn't reflect a single ray of light. The hammer of the Allied invasion was being forged in the quiet reflections that Katharine Burr Blodgett had learned to kill. The moment of truth doesn't happen on a battlefield. It happens in a dark room in Washington, where a group of three-star generals stare at a piece of glass. They expect to see their own arrogant reflections staring back. They expect to laugh, but they see nothing. The glass is so clear, it seems to have vanished into the air. There's no applause. There are no handshakes. Instead, there's a thick, shameful silence. The men who mocked her soap bubbles now have to face the reality that a woman in a lab coat has rendered their entire understanding of optics obsolete. They don't thank her. They don't even look at her. They simply take the glass, classify it under a men-only clearance, and walk out. They didn't just win the war, they stole the victory from the only person who saw it coming. Fitin. The war was won in the light, but the victory was forged in the invisible. By 1945, the Allied machine was an unstoppable juggernaut of clarity. Because of the invisible glass, snipers could peer through telescopic sights without a telltale shimmer giving away their position. Pilots could read their instrument panels in the blinding glare of high-altitude flight. Most importantly, the periscopes of the Pacific and the Atlantic had become true ghosts. The fatal flaw that had claimed so many crews in 1939 had been mathematically erased by a woman who was never allowed on a submarine. But as the victory parades marched through London and New York, a different kind of silence began to descend. Katharine Burr Blodgett did not stand on the deck of a battleship to sign a treaty. She was back in Schenectady, standing over the same trough of water, her hands still steady, her mind already moving toward the next mystery of thin films. The system she had saved the massive military and industrial complex was already beginning to forget her. The cruel irony of Katharine's life is that her genius was so effective it became mundane. We live in a world defined by her invisible touch. Every time you look at a smartphone screen in direct sunlight and can still read the text, every time a cinematographer captures a crisp, lens flare-free shot in a blockbuster movie, every time you put on a pair of anti-reflective glasses to drive at night, you are looking through Katharine's soap bubbles. She gave the world the gift of sight without reflection, and in return, the world gave her the ultimate reflection of its own bias: anonymity. The scientific community of the mid-century was a fortress of ego. While her male colleagues at GE were featured on the covers of magazines, Katharine's name began to fade into the fine print of patent filings. She never complained. She never sought the medals that were being pinned to the chests of men who had simply used the tools she perfected. She was a pure scientist, a woman who found more satisfaction in the perfect alignment of a molecular layer than in the roar of a crowd. But we must ask ourselves, what is the cost of such a bitter victory? The system rewarded her brilliance with a quiet corner. It took her invention, classified it, used it to win a world war, and then commercialized it into a billion-dollar industry, all while keeping the creator in the shadows. They didn't deserve her. They didn't deserve the meticulous patience of a woman who was willing to dip glass 44 times just to prove that the impossible was merely a matter of geometry. Katharine didn't die with a medal. She died in the same quiet house she always lived in, while the system she saved was busy turning her genius into a trillion-dollar commodity. Look at the screen in your hand, the anti-reflective coating on your smartphone, your laptop, your glasses. It isn't a feature. It is the stolen labor of a woman the world tried to erase. We haven't outgrown the hubris of 1939. We've just gotten better at hiding it. The system still takes the vision and buries the visionary. You are looking through her ghost right now. And most of you didn't even know her name. History isn't written by the winners. It's written by the people who had the most to hide. We still live in a world that prioritizes the loud system over the quiet individual. We still celebrate the generals of industry while ignoring the researchers in the basements. We still assume that the biggest problems require the loudest solutions, forgetting that a single layer of atoms placed with enough care can change the course of history. We look through her genius every day. Perhaps it's time we started looking at it. If you believe that stories like Katharine Burr Blodgett's deserve to be remembered, join our ranks by subscribing. We have synthesized this narrative from reputable historical archives and verified sources. However, the fog of war often extends to the history books. If you spot any inaccuracies or have additional details to share, please correct us in the comments. We strive for the absolute truth, and your knowledge helps us get there. Thank you for keeping history alive.